me ask you a question. How many shows do you know that are popular, have 2 or 3 series with one set of cast members, with one specific tone, and one specific set of storylines, that pretty much changes all of those things a series afterwards? The answer to that question would be very few, Doctor Who being one of these few. And that's been something that's been frequently touted as one of Doctor Who's greatest strengths. The idea that you can have any cast members, any tone, any style, and the show can literally rejuvenate itself, much like its main character, every couple of years. However, I've been thinking about this a lot in the last few weeks, and I can't help but feel that we have gone too far into this philosophy, and that we've lost one of the key things that matters in the streaming age: bingeability. In the modern day, individual viewing figures for individual episodes don't count for much. What matters is the watch time on these streaming services. So if you can get someone to watch 6 episodes of a show in one sitting, that's great, because they're on the platform for a long period of time. And I can't help but feel that Doctor Who has failed to really adapt to this. We've seen several attempts to try and adapt to this ever-changing model of streaming. For example, in Series 13 we had Flux, which was a more serialized series. In RTD2 we have the show trying to sort of emulate a Marvel style and scope. However, nothing has really been able to fit that binge model that other shows have managed. And I think one of the key reasons for this is that there are no continuous storylines. Now you might be saying to me, well, series in Classic Who, there probably weren't that many either, and most of the show is largely episodic adventures with completely different casts and crew every couple of years. And while that is true, it is also true that there were several things in classic Doctor Who that made it feel more so like it was an ongoing shared universe. One of my favourite examples of this is what I like to call the Dalek saga in Classic Who. Starting in Genesis of the Daleks, you get to see their origins and their tension with their creator, Davros. After they exterminate him, after they realise that they can live without him, they eventually need to bring him back in Destiny of the Daleks in order to help out in their ongoing fight against the Mavellans. Once they also get defeated in that, Davros is frozen again and they thaw him out for another attempt to help rescue them. This time, however, he decides that he is going to use his scientific knowledge to attempt to bring the Daleks back under his control, thus beginning the first Dalek Civil War, which is then followed up on in Revelation, where we see the beginnings of the two factions, the Imperials and the Renegades, going up against each other for the first time, culminating in Remembrance of the Daleks, where we finally see the all-out Dalek Civil War and the collapse of Skaro. Now, those stories, collectively, were released under 3 separate producers, 3 separate visions of the show, and yet you can follow one after the other, after the other, after the other, and the show rewards you for doing that. It rewards you for carrying on being an invested viewer in the TV show. And this is not actually exclusive to Classic Who either. RTD1 did this as well. Events of each series would directly correlate into future ones, and even events of spin-offs would be related to things going on in the show. For example, Series 1 has the alien spaceship crashing into Big Ben, Jack becoming immortal, the creation of the Bad Wolf, the return of the Daleks after the Time War, and all of these things would be built on, slowly but surely, throughout the subsequent series. The Master would use the alien invasions of past stories as a means to persuade the public in the Series 3 finale.
You've seen it happen. Big Ben destroyed a spaceship over London. All those ghosts and metal men. The Christmas star that came to kill. Time and time again. And the government told you nothing.
And a story like Turn Left only works so well because we know in detail what's been going on in this universe, so it allows you to do an inversion of it. But after Russell T Davies won, this approach that kept people invested in the show, kept people invested in these ongoing storylines, and this shared connected universe that had been built would slowly become less and less refined. And plot points that were seen as pretty major in the past are now seen as mere footnotes. Series 5, in fairness, does carry this on to a certain extent. Victory of the Daleks is a direct sequel to Stolen Earth Journey's End, with the final batch of Daleks hiding out near Earth, trying to resurrect the Daleks following their defeat. The Beast Below very much continues the themes of the Time War that had been built up in the first era. But there's one thing that Series 5 does, which I believe changed the trajectory of modern Who forever, and that was the reset of the universe. In Series 5, it's established that Amy does not remember the alien invasions of RTD1, a stark contrast to other companions like Donna, who we see directly reference these events, albeit even though she's comedically never looking at them. And the reason for this, as it turns out, is to do with the series arc, the finale, the Pandorica, the cracks in time, and eventually the resetting of the universe. However, after this point, Doctor Who's world building and ongoing storylines just kind of go away. Series 6 marks an interesting experiment in New Who history as the first to do a more serialised, self-contained series within its own right, to varying levels of success. But institutions that were seen as vital to the new series early on, like the Shadow Proclamation, Torchwood, and even the motivations of key villains, would be changed or completely discarded pretty regularly. Now, on one level, this makes sense. When a new showrunner comes in, they want to do their own style. However, I think what I'm getting at is that there's been this culture, this idea that when a new showrunner comes in, it has to be a completely self-contained thing, its own stuff that doesn't really abide by the previous era's logic or the previous things that that era has set up, which leads to it feeling sometimes a little bit unsatisfying to watch as like a collective television experience. And I think this is nowhere exemplified better than in the discourse surrounding the changeover from Peter Capaldi's era to Jodie Whittaker's, where key plot points from his era, such as Missy turning good at the end of his finale, or the Doctor finally finding the lost Gallifrey after all these years, are either completely reversed or just straight up ignored. Now, don't get me wrong, again, I want to make the point clear. Chris Chibnall, as the creative in charge of the show, has every right to do that. If he wants to do a new vision, he can. But I think that you can do a new vision whilst also making it satisfying for viewers as well. If there had been a storyline which explored the Master's return to evil following Missy, then I don't think you'd have had the response that a lot of fans did have to it. It's this jarring idea that we're not actually watching one show, but instead 3 separate versions of a show that sometimes interlink. And I think that this leads to long-time viewers kind of feeling unsatisfied and newer viewers being confused as to like where they're at, what counts and what doesn't. And like, I'm not saying for a second that there needs to be this consistent storyline throughout all of new Doctor Who. However, going back to my Dalek analogy earlier, do you remember how I said that those stories took place across 3 separate producers? If we were to apply that same logic to now, that would be like if a Dalek plotline began in the Russell era and was followed on through stories, albeit, in different styles and different tones, all the way up to the end of the Chris Chibnall era, crescendoing and creating this sense that the universe was going in a certain direction and had a certain sense of continuity to it. And I just think that not only is that more satisfying, but it's also more in keeping with the modern streaming model. The whole appeal of modern day shows is how things build from series to series. But Doctor Who can't do that because every couple of series a new guy comes in and goes, I'm going to completely disregard everything. It's the approach of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Now, in all fairness, Russell T Davies did try and pick up from things that were left off in Chris Chibnall's era, albeit in small ways. For example, obviously, the 15th Doctor addressing that he was a child who was adopted, very much pointing to the timeless child, and obviously the Fugitive Doctor cameo and all that sort of stuff. But quite frankly, I think that's one of those storylines that most people wouldn't have minded if it was just left there. And I think this does work to an extent, at least early on, in the 60th when the Timeless Child and the Flux are used as reasons for why the 14th Doctor is struggling mentally. However, after a while, it basically just becomes like lip service, rather than a meaningful continuation of anything that was really going on. Now, I was saying that the problem with RTD2 was that it didn't carry over enough from the Chris Chibnall era. No, not really. But what I am saying is there are ideas that you can use in other eras. It's not a crime to take a storyline from a previous era and build upon it in a new one. This goes doubly true for characters. Why is it that a companion or a doctor can't overlap between showrunners? Obviously, in Classic Who, that happened all the time. Season 12 was literally a transitional series between two production teams where both worked on it. Season 18, JNT's first season, has Tom Baker in the lead role for a final series. But we've kind of gotten obsessed with this idea of marketing the show as a new era. And there are only so many times you can say that to the audience before they go, but is it? And I think by acknowledging that it is all one show, while still keeping to the core principle of getting fresh voices in, you would make for much easier and more compelling viewing for more casual audiences. I think one of the major reasons why RTD1 was as successful as it was the world building that could be built up across 4 series, and you come to the end of that and it feels like the end of this story that's been building up for 4 series. And I just think it's a shame that that approach hasn't even been attempted since. But let me know what you guys think. I'd actually be genuinely curious to know what your thoughts are on all of this. If you did enjoy this video, be sure to give it a like, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you later.